brought to you by the San Luis Obispo County Office of Education and the SLOCO Arts Collaborative. You're back with Touching Bass, and today we are going in depth with the history of the bass, the band's bridge of rhythm and harmony. Ba-dum, 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 boom, boom, ba-dum, boom, 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 boom. From the court somewhere in Renaissance Europe to the rockin' stage of a Red Hot Chili Peppers concert, the bass guitar has a story as rich and resonant as its sound, spanning centuries of completely different musical landscapes. Let's dive into its fascinating journey, tracing its roots. See what I did there? Roots, like root notes. Haha. Tracing its roots from the earliest string instruments to the electric powerhouse we know it as today. Our story begins in the Middle Ages and Renaissance Europe with the rebec and viola da gamba. The rebec is a medieval bowed stringed instrument that was popular from the 13th to 16th centuries in Europe. The rebec's history is intertwined with the development of stringed instruments across Europe, especially during the medieval and Renaissance periods. The rebec likely originated in the 9th to 10th centuries in the Islamic world. It is believed to have evolved from the rebab, a Middle Eastern bowed string instrument which spread into Spain and other parts of Europe during the Muslim conquest. The rebec has a small, rounded or pear-shaped wooden body, often made of pine or spruce for the top and maple for the back and sides. It is one of the precursors to the modern violin. And as a precursor to the violin, it is also a precursor to the double bass because the violin and the double bass are very much interconnected, as you will see throughout our video. And here it is, right next to a violin. You can kind of compare its size and its shape, and it even was played with a bow. So it was often played by holding it at the shoulder, though musicians in southern Europe and northern Africa held it down in the lap to grip the bow from below. There is some discrepancy in the use of frets with the instruments, as scholars describe it as fretless, while some illustrations depict frets. This is possibly due to frets not appearing on bowed instruments in England until the 15th century. It has a distinct, somewhat nasally and piercing sound, which was quite popular in early European music, especially in folk and courtly settings. It typically has 3 strings, though some later versions have 4. The instrument is usually played with a bow, though some early versions might have been plucked or strummed, particularly in folk contexts. The neck is often shorter than that of modern bowed instruments, and the scroll is sometimes less elaborately carved. Originally strung with gut strings, the rebec was tuned in various ways depending on regional and historical variations. The most common tuning was in fifths, like a violin, so example would be G to D to A, though tunings in fourths or thirds were also used, and the bass is tuned in fourths, if you remember that. The bow used with the rebec is typically shorter and maybe more convex than modern violin bows, with a light, delicate tension. Early bows were made from horsehair, though in some cases gut or other material was used. The sound of the rebec is bright, sharp, and somewhat metallic with a rich, resonant quality when played in an ensemble. Its piercing tone made it ideal for outdoor or lively dances, and its smaller size made it more portable than larger instruments. It was used to accompany dancing, storytelling, and festivities. During the 16th century, the rebec's popularity began to wane as other instruments like the violin, viola, and even the lira da braccio, a bowed instrument with a fingerboard, gained favor. The shift was due in part to the growing complexity and refinement of new bowed instruments, as well as changes in musical taste. The viola da gamba, literally meaning viol of the leg, is a family of bowed string instruments that were particularly popular in the Renaissance through the Baroque period. It is often considered the precursor to the modern cello and double bass. Viols first appeared in Spain and Italy around the 15th century. The Arabic rebab is also considered a precursor to this instrument. Viols came in multiple sizes with hollow wooden bodies and peg boxes where string tension can be increased or decreased to adjust. There were treble, tenor, and bass sizes that were commonly used. The violone was the largest of the viol family. Violone literally translates to large viol in Italian. This term is sometimes used to apply to members of the violin family, but most often it refers to this particular viol period instrument. And here you can see exactly what one looks like, and it's very similar to the modern double bass. But there are some key differences, and a major difference being the frets, which you can actually see depicted here in the picture. They were not fixed frets, but tied to the fingerboard and movable to adjust for better intonation, and usually made of gut, as opposed to the violin family, which has no frets. This allowed the instrument to be played more like a guitar or a lute, with the player pressing the strings against the frets. The viola da gamba is played with a bow that is slightly convex, as opposed to the more concave shape of modern violin bows. The bow is often shorter than a modern violin bow and is typically strung with horsehair. The player holds the bow underhanded as opposed to the modern overhand grip used in violin playing. The viola da gamba has a warm, rich, and resonant tone, often described as more human or vocal than that of modern string instruments. The instrument's larger body size and use of gut string contribute to its deep, mellow sound. The sound is more subtle and intimate compared to the modern violin family, making it ideal for chamber music and private performances. The viola da gamba is typically played with the instrument held between the knees, hence the name gamba, meaning leg. Like maybe if we were playing the bass like this. When it comes to playing technique, the viola da gamba is played sitting down with the instrument resting between the player's legs. The musician uses the fingers on the left hand to press the strings down, just like we do, onto the frets, and the bow is held with the right hand. Here's an illustration of how it would have been held and played, and you can see how she's holding the bow, and it's in an underhanded style instead of overhand in the way one would play the double bass or the modern violin. And this illustration in particular does not show any frets, and that might be due to frets not really appearing in England until the 15th century. Features include it has a distinctive, deep, rounded body, often made of spruce for the top and maple for the back, similar to what we talked about with the rebec. The body is typically larger than the violin, but smaller than the cello, and its shape is more rounded than the flatter shape of modern orchestral string instruments. The viola da gamba comes in several sizes, from small alto or tenor versions to larger bass models. Common sizes include treble, which is the soprano size, tenor, and bass, with the bass being the largest and deepest sounding. It typically has 6 or 7 strings made of gut, though some later versions had more strings. Little fun fact here, strings were primarily made from catgut, which, despite its name, is not made from cat. Catgut makers usually use sheep or goat intestines, and occasionally cattle, hogs, horses, or donkeys. No cats. The term likely originated from kitgut, kit being a small pocket fiddle, and over time that word morphed into catgut. Here's a photo of some preserved catgut that was used to make string. No one knows exactly when gut was first used for string, but legend has it that Apollo was the first string maker, and there's evidence of gut used as harp strings in tombs of Thebes. It's been a traditional material for strings in the West for thousands of years and still defines the standard classical violin tone. As for the tuning of said strings when it comes to viols, standard tuning is usually in fourths with a major third in the middle, which was like standard Renaissance lute tuning. The viola da gamba reached its peak popularity during the Renaissance and Baroque periods, particularly in France, Spain, and England. It was a key instrument in court music, chamber ensembles, as an accompaniment to song. It was favored by aristocracy and nobility, partly due to its refined, intimate sound. Many famous composers of the time, including Johann Sebastian Bach. Bet you haven't heard of him, right? Just kidding, you've definitely heard of him. Wrote for the viola da gamba, and numerous virtuoso performers emerged in this time. The viol was used in many contexts, such as in concert music, where several viols would perform together, as well as the accompaniment of vocal music. In England, the viol was the primary instrument in concert music, small groups of instruments playing together, that's what I mean when I say that. English viol consorts became a distinct genre of music. Typical Elizabethan viol consort had 6 instruments, 2 basses, 2 tenors, and 2 trebles. Scholars are still divided on whether the bass derived from the viol or violin family, but I say, why not both? So these two bowed and often fretted instruments laid the foundation for modern stringed instruments, including the bass. During this time period, the viola da gamba family, with its deep resonant tones, became the backbone of ensemble music. In the 1500s, stringed instruments had a revolution in northern Italy, and the violin, viola, and cello were created out of thin air. Just kidding. It was out of wood and sheep guts, which made up the strings. The violin was meant for higher ranges and speed, the viola designed to fill the alto and tenor ranges, while the cello encompassed a rather large range of all human voicings, and a bit lower. So with the cello harmonized in the low to mid-range, there was still a need for a deeper, more resonant voice, one much lower than the human voice could touch. Thus, the larger double bass, blended from the violin family and the viola da gamba, was born to provide that deep foundation for the orchestral music being written at that time. The double bass, with its massive size and rich tone, became indispensable in orchestras. Its tuning in fourths and sloped shoulders influenced the design of future bass instruments. The double bass goes by many names: upright bass, acoustic bass, or simply the bass. It's the lowest pitched instrument in your standard symphony orchestra. It's also used in so many different styles, including jazz, bluegrass, blues, country, and obviously classical music. It's usually about 6 feet tall from scroll to end pen, but there are 3/4 sizes and half sizes for smaller people. It's usually constructed from different types of wood, including maple for the back, spruce for the top, and ebony for the fingerboard. It has no frets and internally is nearly identical in construction to the other violin family instruments, but it also has features found in the viol family. It is the only modern bowed stringed instrument that is tuned in fourths, like a viol, as opposed to fifths, like violins, violas, and cellos.
Some composers that utilized this marvelous instrument. We have Antonio Vivaldi. While Vivaldi did not invent the use of the double bass, he is one of the first major composers who wrote for the instrument in orchestral contexts. His work, Concerto for Two Violins and Bass, RV 583 in 1722, in particular uses the bass violin, or double bass, to reinforce the harmonic foundation. Vivaldi also used the double bass in his orchestral works like the Four Seasons concertos. Although the double bass is not a standout solo instrument in these works, its presence is integral to the bass line in the orchestra. Next we have Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach often used double bass in his basso continuo sections, though it wasn't often used as a prominent solo instrument. It was a key part of his orchestral texture, especially in works like Brandenburg concertos, where the bass lines are reinforced by the double bass. Next we have Joseph Haydn, and Haydn often considered the father of the symphony and string quartet, and he made significant contributions to the development of the double bass as an essential orchestra instrument. He used the double bass in both symphonic and chamber works, sometimes for structural support and sometimes for more intricate parts. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He was one of the early composers to incorporate the double bass. In his works, the double bass was often used to provide harmonic foundation, but also occasionally for more melodic or soloistic passages. Key works that feature the double bass include Symphony No. 40 in G minor, Symphony No. 41, Jupiter, Piano Concerto No. 9 in E flat major.
And what you are currently listening to right now is Mozart's Symphony No. 40 in G minor.
Ludwig van Beethoven also further expanded the role of the double bass in orchestra. He used it more expressively and in varied ways, often to reinforce harmonic progressions, but he also incorporated it into a more complex contrapuntal textures. Franz Schubert used the double bass more subtly in his symphonic works, sometimes blending it with other lower string instruments for a more cohesive sound. However, in some moments, it's prominent enough to be noticed, especially in the orchestral versions of his chamber works. Now, as music evolved, the double bass faced challenges. Its size, for one, made it difficult to transport, and its volume struggles to compete in louder settings. That's still true today because people are still out there using double basses. While bowed instruments ruled classical music, plucked stringed instruments like the lute and later the guitar gained popularity for their portability and versatility. The instruments introduced key features that would influence the bass guitar. With their fretted necks and portable design, the development of all of these instruments set the stage, haha, pun intended, for the development of the bass guitar. So by the 19th century, guitars were being designed with steel strings and larger bodies to enhance their volume, laying some important groundwork. So while classical music was all the rage in Europe, the US was busy developing its own musical style of jazz, heavily drawing from African rhythms and music patterns, and characterized by lots of improvisation. European classical music traditions, particularly harmony, melody, and formal structure, also played a significant role in shaping early jazz. So, essentially combine the rhythmic complexity of African music with the harmonic progressions and formal structure of European classical music, and you get something like jazz. New Orleans is widely considered to be the birthplace of this style. So as jazz and swing music grew in popularity during the early 20th century, musicians faced a problem: how to amplify the double bass to compete with louder horns and drums. All right, now it's time for the first attempts at electrification.
It was in the 1930s in Seattle, Washington, that electric bass design would undergo a revolution. It was there in 1935 that Paul Tutmarc introduced a cello-sized, solid-body bass instrument he called the electric bull fiddle. But 1 year later, in 1936, the Audiovox 736 bass fiddle was released to the market, which most people now cite as the first electric bass ever made. And it was the first instrument of its kind.
It was fretted with 4 strings and designed to be played horizontally like a guitar.
Its solid body was carved from black walnut with an ebony fingerboard, and an amp was created to accompany the instrument that Tutmarc dubbed the Audiovox 936.
But despite its innovative design, it didn't gain widespread adoption. It wasn't until 1951 that Leo Fender, founder of Fender Electric Instrument Manufacturing Company, so you've heard of him, trust me, he invented the groundbreaking Fender Precision bass and changed music forever. This solid body electric bass combined the range of the double bass with the fretted design of the guitar. It was portable, easy to play, and could hold its own in a band setting. It just needed electricity and an amplifier. And when amplified, it was less prone to audio feedback as opposed to an amplified acoustic bass or double bass. With this design, musicians could now be more mobile on stage and far louder. So the precision bass, or P-bass as we call it today, quickly became a staple of rock, jazz, and blues, and it completely set the standard for electric bass design. It was more ergonomic for working musicians. My back, thanks you, Leo, for real. And its sound was more punchy and versatile. It had frets that allowed for bassists to better play in tune, which is great, I kind of need that, as compared to the fretless double bass in which musicians must purely rely on their ear for proper tuning of notes. Although do not fret, double bass lovers. Haha. People do continue to use the double bass in music, especially in classical, jazz, and folk music. And often now with amplification, though sometimes without if the room has great acoustics. Most classical concerts are not going to amplify necessarily. Monk Montgomery, a member of Lionel Hampton's post-war big band, became the first person to tour with the Fender bass in 1953, so just 2 years after it was invented. He was also the first to record with the electric bass in July of that same year. So a lot happened really quickly. Gibson, not to be outdone by Fender, introduced its own electric bass guitar in 1953. It was called the EB1, and initially it was just simply the electric bass. This instrument featured a violin-shaped body, a single pickup, and an extendable end pin allowing it to be played both upright and horizontally. Rather than just styling the body after the electric guitar, they shaped the EB1 to more resemble a double bass. EB1 production sadly ended in 1958 when Gibson replaced it with the EB2 and later the EB0. They renamed the electric bass to the EB1 at that time. One of the most iconic bass guitars in history is the Hofner 500. often referred to as the Beatles bass. It was introduced in 1955, and its hollow body bass that was lightweight and had a warm, woody tone. And its fame skyrocketed in the early 60s because Paul McCartney of the Beatles adopted it as his primary instrument. So the Hofner became synonymous with McCartney's melodic bass lines and contributed to the distinct sound of the Beatles recordings. So as the demand for electric bass guitars grew, manufacturers introduced various models to cater to different musical styles and preferences. In 1960, Fender launched the Jazz Bass, which featured a slimmer neck and dual pickups. It's actually what I have. This is a Jazz Bass. Dual pickups right here. And it offered a wider tonal range and faster playability, traits that appealed to jazz and funk musicians. This beautiful baby right here, this is a Jazz Bass. So around the same time, Rickenbacker introduced the 4000 series, known for their distinctive tone and unique design, which attracted artists like Paul McCartney and Roger Waters. In Motown, we have James Jamerson, another famous bass player, and he used a P bass to lay down some of the most iconic bass lines that you've definitely heard. Carol Kaye is another very famous bassist that is on a ton of recordings. She helped define modern bass guitar sound. One, with her pick style bass playing, which wasn't common initially. Many bass players in the 1960s were playing fingerstyle like this, especially in jazz or Motown. Kaye's pick style gave her tone a bright, punchy attack that stood out in recordings. This sound became a hallmark of the 1960s pop and R&B recordings. And her bass lines weren't just supporting the chords, they often added melodic movement and counterpoint. She had a strong sense of swing and syncopation influenced by her jazz background. She often used foam mutes under the strings near the bridge to dampen the overtones, giving her a tight, thumpy sound, perfect for radio and vinyl recordings. Over the decades, the bass guitar has continued to evolve. Manufacturers have introduced innovations such as active electronics, which provide greater tonal control, extended range basses, offering more notes and versatility, and ergonomic designs that enhance comfort and playability. As early as the 1960s and 70s, bassists and luthiers experimented with custom-made extended range instruments. However, the first widely accepted and commercially successful 5-string bass came in the 1980s when manufacturers began producing them regularly. And that's what I have, 5-string. Additional low B, boom, that's what I have, below the standard E string. The standard tuning for this is B, E, A, D, G. And having this string adds 5 more semitones of range below the standard 4-string bass. And it also allows bassists to stay in lower positions without needing to shift as often. So some key milestones. The Alembic, known for its high-end custom basses. Alembic was among the first to experiment with 5-string designs in the late 1970s. These were custom order instruments, not mass-produced, but they set the tone for what was to come. Then you also have Ernie Ball and then Yamaha as well. They introduced the Stingray 5 in the 1980s, which became one of the first mass-market 5-string basses. Yamaha and Ibanez also joined the 5-string market around this time. And Fender, which had dominated the 4-string market with their P bass and their jazz basses, they were slower to adopt the 5-string, but in 1988, Fender finally introduced its Fender Jazz Bass 5, acknowledging the growing demand for beautiful basses just like this one. In the decades that followed, innovation took off. Companies like Rickenbacker and Gibson introduced new designs with unique tonal qualities. Active pickups, 5-string models, and headless designs expanded the possibilities for bassists everywhere. With these advancements came legendary players who pushed the boundaries of the instrument. James Jamerson's grooves defined Motown. Jaco Pastorius turned the bass into a solo instrument in jazz fusion, and then Flea brought raw energy to the forefront of rock and funk. Today, the bass guitar is more versatile than ever. Digital modeling, effects, and advanced materials allow players to create sounds once unimaginable. From the heart of a rhythm section to the spotlight on a stage, the bass continues to evolve and inspire people. The bass guitar has played a crucial role in shaping the sound and culture of modern music. Bassists like James Jamerson, Jaco Pastorius, and Flea have pushed the boundaries of what the instrument can achieve, influencing countless musicians and listeners. The bass guitar's ability to provide both rhythm and melody has made it indispensable for contemporary music production and performance. The bass guitar is more than an instrument, really. It's the soul of music. From its humble beginnings to its iconic status today, it's a testament to centuries of innovation and creativity. And as music continues to evolve, so too will the bass guitar.
Brought to you by the San Luis Obispo County Office of Education and the Sloco Arts Collaborative.